There's a certain kind of silence that speaks louder than any courtroom ruling, louder than any headline, louder than any press conference. And today, on Christmas Day, that silence came from the judge. No statement, no response, no sympathy, just nothing. And for a man who has spent decades controlling rooms, controlling people, controlling narratives, that silence is the loudest rejection of all. Sean Diddy Combs woke up today hoping for a Christmas miracle. Not a spiritual one, not a reflective one, a legal one. The kind where paperwork gets rushed in at the last minute, lawyers scramble, and a judge suddenly feels generous because it's the holidays. He wanted the system to bend for him one more time. He wanted to walk free on Christmas morning. He wanted to sit at a table surrounded by family, cameras, and carefully staged smiles. That didn't happen. Instead, what happened was far more telling. His legal team filed a frantic, last-minute appeal. A demand, really, insisting that the judge either release him immediately or reduce his sentence right now. Not later. Not after proper hearings. Right now. As if decades of power had trained him to believe that timing alone could override accountability. But the judge didn't even entertain it. No denial. No explanation. No holiday courtesy response. Just silence. And that silence said everything. You are no longer important. You do not get special treatment. You will wait like everyone else. For many people watching this, especially those who've lived long enough to see powerful men dodge consequences their entire lives, this moment hits differently. Because how many times have we watched wealth rewrite the rules? How many Christmases have passed where justice took the holiday off? Not this time. This wasn't a judge being cruel. This was a judge being done. Done with manipulation. Done with emergency filings. Done with public pressure. Done with a man who still refuses to understand that his era of control is over. And let's be honest here. If you're 65 or older, you've seen this movie before. The powerful man who thinks the law exists for everyone else. The celebrity who mistakes attention for immunity. The millionaire who believes consequences are for regular people. But here's the difference this time. The judge didn't even bother to argue. That's not mercy. That's dismissal. Diddy wanted a miracle. What he got instead was reality, cold, quiet, and unavoidable. His appeal failed before it even started. Not because it wasn't clever. Not because it wasn't aggressive. But because it was desperate. The kind of filing that screams, I'm running out of moves. And when the judge didn't respond, the message was clear. Christmas is for families, not for men who destroyed them. There's something deeply symbolic about that. While families across the country were sitting together today, grandparents, parents, grandchildren, this man sat alone, facing the consequences of years he spent believing he was untouchable. And no amount of money can buy back that moment. What makes this even more telling is that this wasn't his first attempt. This wasn't even his second. Over and over again, his appeals have been denied. His bail requests rejected. His arguments dismissed. And every single time, he comes back louder, more entitled, more convinced that the next filing will finally break the wall. But the wall isn't cracking. It's holding. And for an older audience watching this unfold, there's a strange sense of validation in that. Because many of you have waited your whole lives to see a system that doesn't flinch just because someone is famous. You've watched powerful men age without ever answering for the harm they caused. You've watched victims grow old while abusers stayed rich. This time, the script flipped. The judge didn't need to say a word. The silence itself was the verdict. And here's the part no one on Diddy's side wants to admit. This wasn't about timing. This wasn't about Christmas. This was about the judge refusing to ignore the facts any longer. Especially the reality that what happened with Cassie and others was not consensual, not misunderstood, and not something that could be waved away with legal gymnastics. That's why the sentence stands. 4 to 5 years. A number that some say he should be grateful for. A number that many victims would argue is still light. But even that wasn't enough for him. Because gratitude has never been part of the equation. Accountability feels like oppression to people who've never been held accountable. So today, while the world celebrated, the system stood still. And in that stillness, justice quietly held its ground. No miracle. No release. No exception. Just consequences. By the time a judge stops responding, it's no longer about the paperwork. It's about the pattern. And Diddy's problem right now isn't just one failed appeal. It's that his entire legal history has become a loop. File. Denied. File again. Denied again. Change lawyers. File louder. Denied harder. At some point, the system stops explaining itself. It stops justifying its decisions. It stops engaging. Because the record speaks for itself. For years now, every major attempt to loosen the consequences has ended the same way. Bail denied. Motions denied. Appeals stalled. And each time, the court's reasoning has grown sharper, clearer, and less patient. What once required pages of explanation now requires none. That's when you know the tide has turned. For anyone over 65 watching this unfold, this feels familiar, painfully familiar. You've lived through decades where influential men didn't just escape consequences, they aged out of them. They died with their reputations intact while the truth followed them quietly to the grave. And society called that closure. But what we're witnessing here is different. This judge isn't distracted by celebrity. He isn't dazzled by legacy. He isn't impressed by frantic filings or emotional pleas timed around holidays. He's looking at facts, repeated, documented, corroborated facts, and deciding that no amount of pressure changes them. One of the most important things the judge has made clear, repeatedly, is that he cannot ignore the nature of the conduct. Not minimize it, not sanitize it, not reframe it as misunderstanding or mutual chaos. The court has explicitly stated that what occurred with Cassie, and with others, does not meet the standard of consent. That sentence alone changes everything. Because once the court draws that line, there's no procedural trick left. No reworded motion. No reshuffled legal team. No emotional holiday filing that can undo it. Consent is not flexible. Consent is not retroactive. Consent is not something fame redefines. And for older viewers especially, this moment carries weight. Many of you grew up in a time when women were expected to stay silent, endure quietly, and accept that powerful men were just that way. You've seen how long it took for society to even name abuse correctly, let alone punish it. That's why this case resonates. Not because it's celebrity drama, but because it feels like history finally catching up. Diddy's repeated filings now read less like legal strategy and more like denial. A refusal to accept that the system he once navigated effortlessly no longer bends for him. Each motion is louder than the last, yet each outcome is quieter. Denied, denied, denied. At some point, denial becomes the story. And let's talk about the lawyers, because that shift matters too. When you see legal leadership change midstream, it's rarely a sign of confidence. It's a sign of scrambling. Mark Agnifilo no longer appearing as the clear lead. New names stepping forward. Alexandra Shapiro taking center stage. That kind of movement doesn't happen when things are going well. It happens when strategy has failed. For decades, Diddy surrounded himself with people who said yes. Yes to money. Yes to power. Yes to silence. Now he's surrounded by attorneys whose job is to say, "This is the best we can do." And even they can't force a response. That's humbling in a way no prison cell ever could be. What's especially striking is how disconnected the filings are from reality. The idea that a judge would rush to free someone on Christmas Eve because emotion demanded it speaks to a lifetime of special treatment. It assumes urgency where none exists. It assumes sympathy where none is owed. The judge's silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. It was the court saying, "You do not get to weaponize the holidays." And for older audiences, that resonates deeply. Because you understand restraint. You understand duty. You understand that some responsibilities don't pause for celebration. But neither do they bow to manipulation. Justice doesn't rush because someone wants to sit at a dinner table. Justice waits until it's ready. Another thing that hasn't gone unnoticed is the absence of public family displays. No orchestrated Christmas photos. No carefully worded statements about missing dad. No emotional appeals meant to soften public perception. And that silence speaks volumes too. Because even the most predictable PR moves don't land anymore. People aren't buying it. Not now, not after everything that's come out. And older viewers especially can spot performance from a mile away. You've lived long enough to know when emotion is staged and when it's earned. This moment isn't tragic. It's inevitable. What Diddy is experiencing now is what happens when leverage runs out. When money can no longer distract. When lawyers can no longer intimidate. When timing no longer pressures the court. The judge didn't ignore the filing because it lacked effort. He ignored it because it lacked merit. And merit is the only currency that still matters. That's why the upcoming appeal dates in April and May are so critical. Not because they offer hope, but because they're the proper channel. Anything before that is noise. Frantic filing. A man throwing paper at a wall that's already been reinforced. For many older viewers, there's something oddly reassuring about watching this unfold. Not because anyone enjoys seeing someone fall, but because it confirms something you've always known. Power doesn't disappear overnight, but it does erode. Slowly, relentlessly, publicly. And when it's gone, there's nothing left to shield you from the consequences you avoided for years. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about spectacle. This is about the system finally saying, enough. And it's saying it without raising its voice. What makes this moment so unsettling and so revealing is not just what's happening to Diddy, but what's happening everywhere else at the same time. Because while one courtroom is choosing silence, restraint, and discipline, another is unraveling in real time. And the contrast couldn't be clearer. On one side, you have a judge refusing to engage with manipulation, refusing to be rushed, refusing to compromise the integrity of the process. On the other, you have prosecutors embarrassing themselves, exposing shortcuts, arrogance, and a dangerous disregard for the very laws they're sworn to uphold. That's where the Luigi Mangione case enters the conversation. For many watching, especially those who've lived through eras of political scandal, police misconduct, and institutional cover-ups, this case doesn't just raise eyebrows. It raises alarms. Because what came out in court wasn't a technical error. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a violation of basic legal principles that every seasoned law enforcement officer should know by heart. Pennsylvania is a two-party consent state. That means if you're recording someone audio or video, they must be told. Period. No exceptions. No creative interpretations. No, we thought it would be fine. The law is clear, and it exists for a reason. Yet prosecutors allowed, or directed, Luigi Mangione to be recorded during interrogation without his knowledge. That alone is enough to compromise an entire case. And here's where older viewers really feel the weight of it. Because many of you grew up believing that law enforcement followed rules, that prosecutors were careful, that procedure mattered. You believed that safeguards existed to prevent abuse. What this case shows is how quickly those safeguards disappear when arrogance takes over. Mangione was read his Miranda rights. He asserted his right to remain silent. He asked for an attorney. He asked for a phone call. And instead of respecting that, he was left alone in a room, unknowingly recorded by audio devices, body cameras, and surveillance behind a one-way mirror. That's not just questionable. That's dangerous. And when Mark Agnifilo stood up in court and asked, "Do you even know if this is legal?" the response was chilling. The officer admitted he was following instructions from the DA's office. That admission alone tells you everything you need to know. Because when law enforcement stops thinking independently and starts hiding behind orders, accountability collapses. History has taught us that, again and again. Older generations know exactly where that road leads. What happened next was almost cinematic. As the defense dismantled the prosecution's position piece by piece, the state did what it had to do to avoid a catastrophic ruling. It withdrew Mangione's statements entirely. Not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. That's not a win for justice. That's damage control. And for people who've lived long enough to see corruption dressed up as competence, this moment feels painfully familiar. When the system overreaches, it doesn't just hurt defendants, it weakens public trust. It hands ammunition to those who already believe the law is selective. This is why the contrast with Diddy's case matters so much. In Diddy's courtroom, the judge is careful, deliberate, restrained. He refuses to be rushed. He refuses to bend. He refuses to make mistakes that could undo years of work. In Mangione's case, prosecutors rushed. They overstepped. They assumed compliance. And now their case is bleeding credibility. That difference isn't about fame. It's about discipline. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Corruption doesn't always look like bribery or backroom deals. Sometimes it looks like confidence without caution. Like prosecutors who believe the ends justify the means. Like officers who assume recording someone without consent will never be questioned. Older audiences recognize this pattern instantly. Because you've watched institutions fail not from lack of rules, but from lack of respect for them. And the most ironic part? The same attorney once associated with Diddy, the same man whose name people thought had disappeared, is now the one exposing prosecutorial misconduct elsewhere. That alone should make everyone pause. Because it shows that the law isn't loyal to people. It's loyal to process. And when that process is followed, power crumbles. When it's ignored, cases collapse. This is why the judge in Diddy's case refuses to move fast. He understands what haste costs. He understands that one procedural mistake could hand a future appeal everything it needs. So he waits. And that waiting is not weakness. It's wisdom. For viewers over 65, this moment stirs something deeper than outrage. It stirs concern. Because if prosecutors can illegally record someone today, who gets recorded tomorrow? If rights can be ignored because it's convenient, whose rights are next? Justice doesn't fail all at once. It fails in inches. That's why this case matters beyond headlines. It's not about liking or disliking anyone involved. It's about whether the system remembers what it's supposed to protect. In Diddy's situation, the system is holding firm. In Mangione's, it's being exposed. And exposure is the first step toward reform, but only if people are paying attention. This isn't entertainment. This is accountability in real time. And the older you get, the more you understand how rare that is. At a certain point in life, noise stops mattering. The headlines fade. The arguments blur together. The money loses its shine. And what's left is something far heavier: legacy. Not the one written in press releases, but the one written in memory. The one people talk about when your name comes up and you're not in the room anymore. That's where this story ends. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with silence. The judge's silence. The court's restraint. The slow, unavoidable closing of doors that once flew open on command. For someone who built an empire on attention, this is the cruelest consequence of all. And for older audiences watching this unfold, there's a gravity to it that younger viewers might miss. Because you know that life doesn't usually end with a dramatic speech. It ends with quiet realization, with long nights, with the understanding that there are no more moves left to make. Diddy wanted a Christmas miracle. What he got instead was time alone, time to sit with what can't be undone. And time is a harsher judge than any courtroom. This isn't about humiliation. It's about reckoning. The court didn't need to humiliate him. It didn't need to lecture. It didn't need to explain itself. It simply refused to participate in the illusion that power still mattered. And that refusal carries a lesson, one that resonates deeply with people who've lived long enough to see patterns repeat. Because you've seen this before. You've watched men who believed they were untouchable age into irrelevance. You've seen legacies collapse not because someone attacked them, but because the truth finally had space to breathe. And you've learned that justice doesn't always arrive early, but when it does arrive, it stays. What makes this moment different is that it's being witnessed. Not buried, not delayed, not softened for comfort. It's happening out in the open with no grand statements, no spin, no distractions. Just process. And that matters. Because for decades, people were told to wait. Victims were told to be patient. Families were told not to rock the boat. Society was told that powerful men were complicated, misunderstood, too important to lose. This time, no one is saying that anymore. The judge didn't rush because of Christmas. The system didn't bend because of fame. The law didn't blink because of money. And for a generation that spent much of its life watching exceptions made for the powerful, this moment feels quietly historic. There's also something deeply human in the absence of public sympathy. No carefully staged family photos. No emotional appeals designed to melt hearts. No last-minute redemption narrative. Because redemption isn't something you announce. It's something you earn. And earning it requires accountability, not avoidance. Reflection, not resistance. Acceptance, not denial. That's the part that lingers. At this stage, the appeals scheduled for April and May are no longer about escape. They're about record, about process, about how history will document this chapter. And history is far less forgiving than any judge. For those watching who are 65 and older, this moment may stir complicated feelings. Relief, sadness, validation, maybe even grief, not for the man, but for the years it took to get here. Because justice delayed always costs someone something. But justice acknowledged, even late, still matters. And maybe that's the real message of this Christmas that never came. That miracles aren't about sudden freedom or erased consequences. Sometimes the miracle is simply that the system holds. That it doesn't rush. That it doesn't flinch. That it doesn't forget. The silence from the bench wasn't cruelty. It was closure. Not final, but firm. And for anyone who has ever felt small in the shadow of powerful people, that silence was loud enough to hear. So as this chapter closes, the takeaway isn't celebration. It's reflection. Because in the end, the loudest thing in this story wasn't a denial, a sentence, or a headline. It was the quiet moment when the system finally said, without saying a word, "This ends here. Checkmate."